All right, good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. Welcome to our diversity lecture for today. Our guest speaker is Dr. Anne-Marie Nunez, who is a professor in the Higher Education and Student Affairs program. And the title of her presentation today is Creating Opportunity Structures for Latinx in Higher Education. So Anne-Marie, thank you for taking the time out. Thanks to all of you for being here today. As we proceed with this session, please do type questions in the chat box. We'll let Anne-Marie get through her presentation first and then open the floor up for Q&A with the remaining time that we have. I will continue to monitor the waiting room to allow people to come in. And so I'll turn it over to you, Anne-Marie, to get us started.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us on a Friday morning. I know there are other places that you could be, and happy April. I am gonna try to share my screen. Let me see if someone can maybe walk me through so I can get that into, is that good? Can people see it?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not in, you can see the whole slide. Awesome, okay. So yeah, the title of this talk is Creating Opportunity Structures for Latinx in Higher Education. This is really the integration of a lot of research that I've been doing since, well, actually before I entered the academy. Sorry, let me see. I don't see, okay, good. So this is the image that kind of guides me as I do this work. These are two children visiting a science fair that was actually brought out to the community in downtown San Antonio. So this was, you know, just any of you who have been to San Antonio, right near the Riverwalk, how a Hispanic serving institution, UTSA, brought out a science kind of fair to the community. And so that's some of what I'm going to be talking about. Here you can see these kids, they're looking at rocks. This is the Student Geoscience Education Association. And so just the creative outreach that Hispanic serving institutions do as part of this broad idea of creating opportunity structures throughout different educational stages for Latinx students. A lot of my work really is responding to the significant demographic transformation that's taken place in the US. You can see here, these are the major four largest racial ethnic groups that the US Census counts. And Hispanics are here listed as, or they're represented in orange. And you can see how fast they've grown in the past decades. In 1970, Hispanics were only 4% of the population. Right now, they are 20%. Also, they are a young population. 25% of the K-12 population in the United States public schools right now is Latinx. And so they're projected to be almost 30% of all the population by the year 2050. And so the importance of education at all stages, responding to the needs of these students and communities is really, really critical. Just to give you a little bit of background on my research, it has addressed three areas, really the educational trajectories of populations with different social identities. So first generation college going students, in addition to Latinx, migrant students, immigrant students, English learner students, and all of that diversity has led me to explore theoretical perspectives for understanding the diversity within these populations and how they navigate or are instantiated and inscribed in power structures that can enhance or constrain their opportunities, which I'm going to talk about more today. And so to really draw on some of the insights from the Black feminist approach of intersectionality. In addition, as part of looking at opportunity structures, I've looked at the institutions that offer the most access for students who historically have not had access or much access to higher education. And so in the context of Latinx students, that includes Hispanic serving institutions, which I'm going to talk about in more detail later. I've also studied the role of community colleges, transfer, and I'll touch on a little bit later, some of my policy work and public scholarship has also addressed the issue of accountability for institutional performance in policy settings. And then also looking at fostering inclusive climates in higher education in general, so in areas like pedagogy and peer mentoring, and also in STEM, in the area of the geoscience field work, and then a lot more that I'm going to be talking about later. But what I'm excited about to share with you today is the intersection of all these, which is the asterisk in the middle. And so more recently, I have had the privilege and opportunity to actually integrate these three lines of research. And so today I'll really be focusing on more recent empirical inquiry that I've been conducting in that area. In terms of my teaching, it fortunately, I've had the opportunity to teach in areas that reflect my interests, including diversity in higher education, broad access institutions and community colleges, and also intersectionality in higher education, thinking about theoretical perspectives, thinking about both student identity diversity and institutional diversity, and the interplay of those in creating higher education opportunity structures. A couple of my books or book-length manuscripts do focus on Latinx and HSIs, and these are, let's see, the first one is from 2013. I'm going to talk about that very quickly in the next slide. And the second one was really the first book ever to focus on HSIs as organizations. So really focusing on the role of the organization in creating educational opportunity structures. So when those of you who are familiar with OSU and its STEAM, the kind of short presentations folks do, if I had to sum up 8 critical domains for success for Latinx in higher education, and this is in part summarizing that first book that I showed in the prior slide, it would be these 8. I have discussed them in way more nuanced ways, but if I had to kind of give the policy soundbite, right, for the people who just want 1 minute, it really is the importance of pre-college preparation and access to different kinds of coursework, different kinds of capital, relationships, social capital, cultural capital, but that includes both learning the dominant social capital, but also when constructing inclusive campus climates, recognizing the assets that students bring. And I am going to circle back to that as well. For Latinx in particular, they are more apprehensive about taking out loans than other students, more likely to work during college than other students, more likely to want to stay at home and live at home so that they can save and take care of their family. So all of these are domains that higher education institutions must take into account, as well as, stereotypes about Latinos' background and potential, and public policy. How can public policy be structured in ways that will, basically expand opportunity structures for Latinx and other students who typically have not been served in these systems. So to that end, with regard to policy, some of my national service and the impact of my policy work has really focused on increasing support for HSIs and minority serving institutions in the United States. I was invited a few years ago by the White House Commission on Educational Excellence for Hispanics to write a brief. This is during the Obama administration, when they were just to summarize, they were about to implement a policy that might be considered punitive for less well-resourced institutions and the students who attend them. And so I was part of a series of presenters at the commission on how HSIs contribute to the higher education system, and the needs of their students need to be taken into account, and to really challenge some of the more conventional accountability metrics. And I'm happy to talk more about that. But I did want to put in a plug for any of you who are interested in public scholarship. I'm the Central Ohio chapter co-chair of the Scholar Strategy Network, and we have a listserv, and there are opportunities where it really is a network of over 1,000 scholars in higher education in all disciplines across the country. And really the goal of it is to get research into policymakers' hands so policymakers can make more informed decisions. So any of you who are interested in that can reach out to me. As part of this as well, I was also co-author on a National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine report on minority serving institutions that came out in 2019. We presented this to lawmakers, on the Hill, on Capitol Hill, in Washington, D.C. And part of the key finding here, it was a challenging report to write, given that we were looking at such a diversity of institutions, and there's very limited research on this area. And that's part of the reason why I'm going to talk more about that in this presentation. But also the importance of thinking about intentionality in understanding and meeting historically underserved students where they are. And I was extensively involved in disseminating this report around the country to different audiences in addition to Washington, D.C. So I'm gonna just orient you all to the role of Hispanic serving institutions in creating opportunity structures for Latinx students. And so they right now constitute 15% of all institutions in the United States. They were designated by the federal government in 1992 as those institutions enrolling 25% or more undergraduate full-time Latinx students. 1994 I have here as the beginning, because that was the first year in the Higher Education Act that they were designated a grant program that these institutions could apply for. At that time, they numbered 189. Since then, they've almost tripled. And if they were to, if the 352, what we call emerging HSIs, which have 14 to 25% Latinx enrollment, were to become HSIs tomorrow, that would be a 65% increase. So it really reflects, right, that first, one of the first slides I showed you of the increase in the Latinx population. They enroll 2/3 of all Latinx students, and graduate almost half of Latinx STEM bachelor's degree students. And they were considered sort of less well-resourced institutions historically. Most of them are. However, in 2015, the first AAU institution did become an HSI, and that's the UC Santa Barbara, followed by UC Irvine. And so I'll just be completely honest. When I started doing research on HSIs in 2009, like nobody really cared. But as soon as these institutions became HSIs, all of a sudden people paid attention. My research that I'll be talking about today, and that I alluded to earlier, actually did influence a congressional mandate in 2017 that called on the National Science Foundation to create a separate program for HSIs. Before then, they had never had a program for HSIs. So you can see that at the policy level, some of those opportunity structures are expanding a little bit. Why study them as, in terms of the higher education system? They are sites for innovation of serving and supporting students. I'm going to be talking about computer science as a key area of my research right now. The share of, here's an example, right, of how they play a role. The share of computer science bachelor's degrees earned by Hispanics and HSIs was 37%, but in all institutions, it was 11%. And there's little research. I know this from working on the report for the National Academies. It was difficult to write that report, in part because there was little research on what HSIs do to support Hispanic students in STEM, even less that is situated in disciplines. a lot of selective predominantly white institutions tend to receive more National Science Foundation funding. And so research on how to serve and support students in STEM is predominantly conducted at predominantly white institutions, predominantly conducted with white students. So it's really important to consider what creating opportunity structures might look like if we center HSIs and center Latino students. To contextualize further how HSIs provide opportunities, you can see here, this is from the Minority Serving Institutions report. Half in terms of Latinx students in STEM majors, 9.4% of them who are STEM majors are in non-HSIs, half of them are in HSIs. This is slightly different data from a slightly different year than I think I was referring to before. In four-year public institutions, so that's the denominator, almost a quarter of the faculty are Latinx. In non-HSIs, it's about 3.3%, which is maybe about in line with what Ohio State is, okay? I think Ohio State's maybe 3.3% Latinx faculty, more or less. That's pretty average. In terms of all four-year institutions in the United States, STEM faculty in Latinx, 14% of them are Latinx versus 4% in non-HSIs. University presidents, 9.2% of Latinx presidents are in MSIs in general, and just 2% in non-MSIs. So I put this up here because there's a lot of discussion about the importance of same ethnicity or same race role models for students from these groups. And we can see that they're more available, and faculty themselves might have more opportunities at these institutions. So there has been an increase in research on both Latinx populations and on Hispanic serving institutions, particularly in the last 10 years. And so my colleagues Gina Garcia, Vanessa Sansone, and I developed what we call an HSI servingness framework. Because as I said before, HSIs are defined by enrollment. They are not defined by mission. So one of the big concerns is when they get grants, are they actually using those to direct support at Latinx students? And so, what is the culture of these institutions? And so what my colleagues and I did was we comprehensively reviewed all of the literature that's been conducted on HSIs. And this is the references are at the end of this presentation. We published this in the Review of Educational Research, which is an AERA journal. And these are the themes that came out in the literature, right? That there's a lot of racial stratification in institutions that's situated in white supremacy. The MSI's report talks about, HBCUs and tribal colleges and universities and other MSIs as historically being under-resourced. And there a lot of dynamics in state legislation foster that. They also, influences on the extent to which, or the ways in which HSIs serve and support Latinx students. So as I just said, relate to external influences on serving. So that's one level, right? Sort of like in the upper left-hand corner. We've listed a lot of themes that have emerged from the research. But what I'm really gonna focus on a lot today is this second level here of structures for serving. And so these dynamics in the organization or the university about mission and value statements, diversity plans, to what extent are they accessing HSI grants, but also using them to create positive environments and inclusive environments for Latinx and other historically underserved students. And so named compositional diversity, which I've also named here, engagement with the Latinx community, which I showed in an image at the very beginning of this talk, culturally relevant curriculum and pedagogy, and these other issues. And I'm going to be returning to these, but I just wanted to kind of cue you all to this framework of servingness. And so for what ends on the bottom, these are outcomes for students and the ways that students experience their environments. So validating experiences within the structures, to what extent is a campus culturally validating, to what extent is Spanish reflected on campus, to what extent is there discrimination, harassment, and microaggressions, right? Because when I'm doing my research on STEM, yes, Latinx students may report more positive and supportive climates in HSIs, but Latinx students in STEM at HSIs are more likely to report discrimination and harassment than students who are not in STEM fields, right? And that really reflects the importance of considering disciplines and also how they play into environments. And then here we also highlight the importance of considering academic and non-academic outcomes. And so, you know, the conventional academic outcomes are 6-year graduation, course completion, STEM degree completion, right? But it's also really critical to consider non-academic outcomes like self-concept, social agency, community engagement, the extent to which students develop their concept of racial identity, develop graduate school aspirations and civic engagement. And again, I'm going to circle back to this, but I know it's maybe complex, but I'll circle back to kind of some of the research that I'm doing and the implications for this framework, what I'm learning. So the case for the research, I'm going to delve deeper. And like I said, I'm happy to talk about, you know, more some of the themes I talked about earlier of student success, but I'm going to delve into some of the current research that I'm doing on the Computing Alliance of Hispanic Serving Institutions. And so CASI is the acronym for it. It was formed by about 8 HSIs in 2004 and first got funding from NSF in 2006. So it's been in existence like 15 years, which has been just really fascinating for me to work with them. They're already, by now, it's expanded to 40 Hispanic serving institutions and over 30 other partners. And so these partners include nonprofits that are focused on diversifying computer science, industry partners, including Google and other, you know, like the Gates Foundation and others like that. What are their goals? They want to serve as a voice for Hispanics in computing to shape policy and discourse about issues, you know, and actually yesterday, I think, the principal investigator of this, who is at the University of Texas, El Paso, there's a new bill going to the House of Representatives on how science is going to be funded in this country. And so they're being solicited, right, for feedback on the bill. And I provided feedback to her as well on that bill. And so at least twice now, I've been able to inform some of these bills through communication with some of the stakeholders. Eddie Bernice Johnson is the representative who's been doing that. The goal is to raise the Latinx share of computing credentials to 20% by 2030. You may have heard earlier that it was, right now it's 11.8%. And so it's a pretty bold goal. Oh, sorry, let me see. Okay, so I'm the research lead on this project, really to look at what are the sort of departmental organizational cultures and the work of the network. What is it doing to support Latinx students? I think there's a lot of research on what the problems are. But what's some research on solutions and supports and ways that departmental personnel can, you know, take responsibility or enact leadership to support Latinx students. So as part of the grant, these are the research questions that I'm addressing. Organizational analysis to provide insights about leadership and how to improve servingness. So that's, you know, Hispanic servingness and student support. And how do the department, institution, and the discipline affect opportunity structures in CASI departments? And so some literature talks about how all three of those, when talking about STEM in particular, the department, the institution, the discipline, all need to be considered as woven together and all need to be addressed to really authentically address those opportunity structures. So as part of this research, I'm conducting, it's a multiple case study, it's an ethnographic method, and in 4 sites. So my team and I visited 4 campuses in the US that the pseudonyms are North, South, Southwest, and West. They varied by region. So we selected them to vary by region, mission, how long they've been in HSI, and the percentage of Latinx students, the size, and those issues. And that really enables us to see different institutional contexts that constrain or enhance the capacity to serve Hispanic and URM students. And URM is what NSF calls underrepresented minority. And that's been really interesting, by the way, about the work that I do, because I'm communicating with scientists, NSF, policymakers, and some of them use different language. In any case, visiting these different kinds of campuses, what we're hoping is that we can see variation in a range of ways that campuses are enhanced or constrained and innovative in supporting Latinx students that can enhance transferability to other institutional contexts. And one of the arguments that was made in the National Academy's report is that typically models from predominantly white institutions in STEM inclusion are the ones that are used or to apply to new programs and designs, partly because they're the ones that are more available. There's been research on that. But what would happen if we centered Hispanic serving institutions and what they do, right? So that's, and one of the arguments or takeaways from that report is that minority serving institutions have very, very important lessons to teach predominantly white institutions and more selective institutions in how to create more inclusive environments. So just for background, these are the 4 departments that my research team and I visited. And I want to actually, let me step back and acknowledge my research team. They're all current or former graduate students at Ohio State University. Jessica Rivera, Victoria Olivo, and then Jennifer Valdez, who is now a graduate student at the University of Maryland. So the 4 departments that were visited vary along these characteristics. Some of them have been HSIs way longer than the other ones, which has something to do with the proportion that are Latinx, ranging from 25%, it kind of just became an HSI, all the way to 83%. And you can see the enrollments vary a bit, but they all are, there's a typology that my colleagues and I created, and they're all of these institutions are 4-year public universities that are part of large state systems. And that, even though CASI now includes community colleges, its first 8 institutions were institutions of that type. So it originated from institutions of that type. And so that's the one kind of dimension on which these don't vary, to really understand what are the roles of these institutions that they serve so many, I mean, they at least enroll so many students, and what might other institutions be able to learn. Now, I'm going to turn back to this, but you can see here that the percentage of majors, so that's, hopefully that's clear, the percentage of computer science majors who are Latinx varies, right? In South, it's 84%, in North, it's 14%, right? It's, and so, but even the fact that we have these data, it indicates that these institutions are monitoring their data. They are looking at, parity. To what extent do the Latinx, share of Latinx majors reflect the data, the overall enrollment at our institutions? The methods that we used, we reviewed documents, we collected interviews, a lot of them. And so what I'm going to be probably focusing on actually is kind of an integration of those interviews, observations of classes, clubs. We got to go to 2 faculty meetings out of the 4 institutions, tutoring, and for 2 or actually now 3 years, I've been attending regularly meetings of the CASI network. So I understand what they're trying to do. An analysis approach was the constant comparison method and triangulating multiple data sources. So one of the ways, so this is, kind of going to map back onto what I talked about earlier. One of the administrators I talked to was about emphasize the importance of normalizing student success. So academic issues, curricular policies and pedagogy, relational, cultural, financial, and career. And so these are all examples in parentheses of the ways in which, components that these departments emphasize. There was an array of student support. Most students were receiving at least 2 out of 5 of those kinds of support. And not all students felt that they were supported. So it's not all uniformly, supportive, but the idea of having the array of student support meant that if students didn't feel supported in one way, they might access it or experience it in another. So unique ways included professional clubs, like with peer encouragement and mentoring to prepare for jobs, peer-led learning. CASI advocates were students who are assigned to distribute information and encourage their fellow students to apply for opportunities. And I'm going to talk more about those opportunities. And then club leaders are, they're paid. And so they are paid to help to kind of spread the information and be kind of ambassadors to their peers about these supports. So I know that I want to make sure that I leave enough time for questions. I'm going to talk about the things that stuck out to me most, right? So I told you earlier what some of the things that have been identified in the literature. Here are some things that this is the value of doing qualitative research in sites where it hasn't really been conducted. When we wrote the grant, we were focusing on academic, financial, social, and cultural support. A whole new theme of career support came out. And this is actually related to the discipline of computer science. There was a study of all disciplines in STEM, and computer science was the only one that is significantly influenced by industry and employer standards and what they want. So in a way, it makes sense that this particular initiative in this discipline would focus on careers. Obviously, this is critical for Latinx students as well, who really value the importance of work, for whom education is critical engine for social mobility. So some of the campuses had entire courses, like credit courses dedicated to like writing a CV, learning about how to go about applying for jobs or to graduate school. One of the examples that I saw was watching an instructor teach her students who had worked at Dunkin' Donuts and Best Buy how to articulate their experience to potential employers. Because a lot of times these students may say, you know what, like I just work at Dunkin' Donuts, it's no big deal. And she said, no, you have to talk about how, you're organizing, responding to consumers, managing stock, right? And so she's helping them translate their assets. Also teaching students how to do interviews. So there were also like shorter term, right, workshops for students on how to do interviews that weren't necessarily a whole semester, right? There was also regular communication about career opportunities. And so this is really important because posters, emails, faculty announcing it in class, like that means that they were really trying to make those experiences accessible to all students, not just through like networks. I know I referenced earlier the importance of language. One campus was having bienvenidos door hangers to encourage students to meet with faculty, professional conference attendance. So all these students were encouraged to attend professional conferences. So computer science is one of the least diverse STEM disciplines, not only in terms of race and ethnicity, but in terms of gender. Most recent data, only 18% of students that year in computer science graduating were women. So these students have access to both conferences focused on women and on Latinx, and the departments encourage them. They encourage them to apply. They walk them through the steps of applying. And students just talk about this as really making them just understand, wow, we have the same capabilities as other students from other backgrounds and from other institutions, that they really got a lot more self-confidence. In terms of the intersectionality, a lot of Latinas are expected, in comparison to male Latinx students, they're expected to do a lot of caretaking in the home and often not allowed to leave the house. This is not, and so what the staff would do is they would encourage or help Latina students articulate to their families the importance of taking these opportunities. One faculty member, with the student's permission, took the student's phone away from him once and called his mother and said, this is such an important opportunity. You have to let him go to this. So these staff and faculty who understand that involving the family it is important in terms of helping the family understand new opportunities career-wise. Administrators set the tone, provided faculty with resources to support students. So, in these faculty meetings, we would see a lot of times CASI was a line item, right? And the staff were typically allowed to go. They were at the table the whole time. They were telling others about these opportunities, right? So this is, again, another venue of communication about these opportunities that they would filter to all students. Some, we know that in higher education, there's often not a norm to hire PhD students from one's own institution. There were some that were growing their own and or really focused on hiring or promoting good teachers, engaging diverse staff in faculty meetings, and relating to external influences like accreditation, not just as compliance, but to sharpen their equity-focused practice. Talent development mindset. A lot of them tended to assess merit expansively. So some of the students might not know English completely, but some of them also knew how to do math and showed that they knew how to do the coursework, and they would let them into the major. Whereas in other situations, those students might not have been let into the major. Emphasizing, a lot of faculty talked about how teaching is their way of making an impact. And these even included faculty who had, won early career awards from NSF. In addition, flexibility in pedagogy, the idea of it being okay to fail, even encouraging students to talk out their answers, like if they had trouble writing them. One non-Spanish speaking teacher would sometimes ask students who might be struggling in English to sit with one of their peers and them talk through together in Spanish and English on how to come up with an answer. An understanding of the family work and caretaking responsibilities that these students often have. And so sometimes being flexible in terms of when assignments are due and that kind of thing. And perceiving some of these not as deficits, but as student assets. Like a lot of the faculty described the students as hardworking. Some of them were trying to learn the language. They were trying to learn Spanish. They admired that they were bilingual, right? As opposed to, denigrating it, as sometimes happens in the United States. In terms of culturally relevant values, and these kind of are, in a way, they're overlaid, right? These are, but confianza, the idea of developing trust, the idea of respeto, having esteem across stakeholders, including for families, including across the partnerships, and familismo, which I've already talked about, in which in Latinx, there's a particular value on building community and the family. And I'm just checking my time. They also engaged in equity-oriented use of data. And a lot of times when these data disaggregated by race and gender are not even collected. So they were actually collecting it. They actually were reviewing it, and they identified gaps. And if they identified equity gaps, they were trying to figure out what is it that we can do to address those. And so when the multiple institutions would meet, they were looking at their data and saying, which other institution is doing well, with Latinx representation? What can we learn from that one? And external boundary management. this issue of accreditation, right? This is, I think the reason I'm just bringing this up is that it's particularly unique to computing, right? Where computing is one of the disciplines that has external accreditation on the discipline. And so, but they didn't just collect the data for the accreditation, right? They also used it for improvement. Also with careers, and then also leveraging the resources that they had, the multiple resources to create the opportunity structures. So this is the servingness framework. And to circle back, right, like external influences on serving, just identifying accreditation, that comes out of this research. If we look at structures for serving, it cuts across, but say the use of data in race conscious ways, is a strategy that can be used in many areas here. So these are kind of new career support. These are new themes that came out that might be and used to enhance how servingness is conceptualized. And so these are the first case studies in the field to focus on the department and discipline, departmental organizational culture. It extends kind of what we might think of as intentionality and what we might think of as servingness. And I know I mentioned multiple audiences. This research has been challenging, but also has the opportunity to bridge several different audiences of higher education researchers, computing education, and sort of bring them together to be able to, so that they can learn from one another, right? To be able to improve opportunity structures. And so these are just the implications that I've touched on. Again, the importance of focus on these multiple dimensions, understanding the saliency of multiple identities, right? So in some cases, understanding gender as well as race, as one example. Learning from HSIs and MSIs to guide practice at more selective, historically white institutions, and to build culturally relevant organizational practices to serve diverse students. And so I'm just going to end here with the mother and with a mother and her kids, and to just continue the work that's ongoing of broadening educational opportunities. Thank you so much. These are the references. Yeah.
All right, thanks so much, Anne-Marie. That was an awesome presentation. I really enjoyed it. I have, because we're short on time, I have asked everyone if you have questions to include them in the chat box. I don't see any yet, but if you also have them, you can just unmute yourself to ask. But I don't have a question, but just a comment that I really love that what you are sharing and the work that you're doing is asset-based. And it doesn't, I guess, presume that the institution has the solution, but that the students have the solution. And if the institution, helps to facilitate how those talents come through. Are there questions or other comments that you all have?
Lori, I'm just going to make a quick reaction to what you said.
Okay.
So this grant was one of 5 $10 million grants awarded by NSF. Like, these are the first grants of their size through an agency-wide diversity initiative. It was the only one led by a non-historically white institution, and it is the only one that involves students.
Oh, wow.
So that involved undergraduate students. And so I think that what I'm talking about reflects sort of how this is distinctive.
Mm-hmm. Does the funder understand the distinctiveness?
Certain people at NSF do, yes. Not necessarily everybody. but fortunately, and Lori, I've been involved in other building capacity with the folks that do value this.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty great. I see there are some coming in.
Yes. Michael asks, are there any attempts to tie computer education to students' everyday life as lived, so that it is less separated as a discipline? That's and more as in the rhythms of their lives. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the one that we saw was one instructor, or one of them that stands out. It was one instructor assigning students a programming to generate a program in Spanish. right? And so to again, bring in their assets or what they might use in other contexts into the context of computing. And actually, there were a couple times, I think I need to go back to my data, but there were at least a couple times where the instructors had students, I think 2 different departments, students were literally helping design platforms for advising to help the department. So they were helping the department with the department's everyday problems,
Wow.
technically.
Okay. Colette says, I am struck with all the nuances of translation, jargon of agencies, academic jargon, scientific jargon, and then Spanish with all these areas. So the question is, how did you accommodate languages in all of these ways in your study?
I mean, Colette, that's a great question. I was fortunate in that, like, one of my key research team members, Jessica Rivera, I've been a faculty member. I was a faculty member at an HSI for 9 years before I came here. I speak Spanish. Jessica Rivera, who collected a lot of the data, she worked as staff at an HSI and she speaks Spanish. So whenever we would hear the switching going back and forth, we were able to, pick those up in ways that like a non-Spanish speaker would not. And even the values that she and I are a little bit familiar with those values just from our own backgrounds. And in terms of the languages, Colette, that is an ongoing process. If by languages you mean discourse of scientific education versus, say, higher education research, it's something that I'm kind of like learning as I go. And just trying to really listen carefully to how scientists talk about things and try to almost translate in a way that they'll be receptive or to what I'm going to say. And if I don't know how to express it, to ask them, right, for help on how to express what a higher education concept is, right? Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question, Colette?
Yes, it does. It just was so interesting as you were talking, and I was reflecting on how different terms are used in such, tremendously different ways, and how you were able to navigate all of those, and it sounds like seamlessly. So I just, was struck with your facility with that. It was just wonderful.
Thank you.
So Jackie says, this has been a terrific presentation. Thanks so much. I value the term servingness. Are there federal or other initiatives that specifically grant resources to those that center this servingness?
Oh, Jackie, this is such a great, see, Colette and Jackie just answered questions that are right at the edge, I think, of the work that we're doing. I mean, I think that, the first author on the servingness framework, she literally just wrote a love letter to federal agencies that grant HSIs, federal agencies that have programs for HSIs, encouraging the federal agencies to, understand what servingness is and to really value it, and not just award grants to institutions that are going through the motions. And I think we all know when institutions may be more doing talking than doing. And so I can tell you that, Jackie, their NSF has read it, because I know, because I hear this, and it has certainly got the attention of folks at NSF. And so I think that there has been so much, one of the things that's been interesting about doing research in HSIs for as long as I have, is that I think we are at a turning point where there's more receptiveness at NSF to understand what servingness is. So for example, my work gets cited, her work gets cited in NSF's call for proposals. So discursively, right, we're trying to get ahead of everyone to say, this is how this needs to be framed. So I mean, at least with regard to discourse, Jackie. And then I think what we hope is that practice in terms of evaluating grants is going to follow. Does that make sense? And yeah.
Excuse me. Elisa says, I'm interested to know, in your findings, did you see any of the students code switch as Latinx students, as well as switching from English to Spanish, just to feel a sense of belonging to the larger college ecosystem?
This is great. And so let's see, Jessica, so Jessica Rivera, my graduate student, actually interviewed a lot more of the students directly. So she would be able to answer this question probably better than I can, because we have so many stakeholders that we interviewed. I would say, yeah, absolutely, that, you saw students kind of, gosh, going back and forth, I think, in language very comfortably. And I think that's really important, that not all environments make students feel comfortable even switching or expressing themselves in both languages. And one of my favorite examples actually was an immigrant student she was an example of someone who got led into the major because she was taking developmental English, but they let her into the major and she became a leader. And so the amount of potential there, that she was able to develop, and they were supporting her. So I think we did see Latinx students code switching from English to Spanish a lot. And I think that's important because the sense of they felt like it was fine to kind of, go back and forth in terms of languages. And that, to me, that's an indicator of a sense of belonging. Like if one is comfortable kind of spontaneously, talking in Spanish, or you have instructors that say, you know what, I don't know Spanish, but why don't you all talk it through in Spanish and let's get to an answer together. Let's blend it.
Okay. I had a question that just popped into my head, and I just wonder, in your findings or just in future research, had you ever considered looking at the findings of HSIs in comparison to findings of HBCUs or other, mission specific, I guess, institutions?
Yeah. So MSIs. So in the National Academy's report, we distinguish between what we called, and I thought this was great, and great in the sense of, I think it added a lot of clarity for all of us. Enrollment defined MSIs versus mission defined MSIs. Okay. And certainly, Lori, I would say on the whole, right, there are a lot of critiques for HSIs because they're enrollment defined, and HBCUs are mission defined. So I would say if people look at extant research and the research that's cited in the MSI report, there's a lot more, I think, explicit support of Black students in HBCUs than there is in HSIs. And so I think the idea here of servingness is how to bring what's been identified as going on at HBCUs to HSIs, like how to make servingness like mission. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so empirically right now, it's such a big, like if I were to go do, I don't have enough bandwidth to go do this at HBCUs, but I can contextualize it in other literature. And so what I hope is that this is, honestly, part of the servingness is to in a way, we're trying to articulate what it means to be mission-based for HSIs. Mm-hmm. Okay. And encourage like a pathway to that. Mm-hmm. And I see here's a question for Belinda. How can we think about servingness for K through 12 students? So one characteristic of servingness in higher ed institutions is outreach to K-12. And so I can certainly talk about here, a lot of HSIs do have outreach programs. Some of the computer scientists I work with, actually, they were working in summer camps. There's a whole summer camp at one of the departments runs a whole summer camp for women and Latinas in computer science, starting in middle school. And they are able to use that as a recruitment tool, right, to get students into their major, to get students into the university, and then students can become familiar with that. So there's, so one avenue I think is summer camps, right, that in this case are focused on computer science. Another avenue is, visiting schools regularly, right? Like kind of weaving in more visits to schools on, computer science techniques. So there's different ways that that they've done that. And I think, I feel like conceptually, right? Like just have, if K through 12 schools might look at the framework of servingness and think, is there something that we can integrate into our mission statement? Or, I mean, what kind of data can we look at, right? That's disaggregated so that we can look at, for example, what percentage of Latinx students or Black students are in AP math, right? Which is key, or in advanced math. I think so. I think anything, that ranges from the use of data and awareness of serving these students all the way to actual like programs, or even in curricula, building in, say, Spanish, or building in like music, a program that might generate salsa music, which I've also seen, could be examples.
Thank you. There was one question or comment. Dusty says it would be interesting to look at the impact of language immersion schools in comparison to your work. But I'll let you respond to that, but I also want to be conscious of time for those of you who do need to go at 11 o'clock. Thank you for being here. Anne Marie, were you going to respond to that at all?
Yeah. Thank you all for coming. For those of you who have to go, bilingual and or dual language schools. So this is a really, really important question. And when you say language immersion schools, one of my best friends actually works in a variety of them, right? Because I know they can be implemented in different ways, right? Since I do have a lot of background in the English language area. So depending on, sometimes they're implemented almost more like independently. Sometimes so it just might depend on the bilingual or immersion program. But I think that from what I understand of the research on bilingual and language immersion programs, those that are really, really focused on Latinx students, because there's a whole nother, by the way, dialogue that like those dual language and bilingual programs like support white students, that all of a sudden like white parents become interested and they, but when they're really authentically focused on Latinx and Spanish speaking students, that they are definitely excellent places where students can develop STEM skills, because it's almost like two different discourses or literacies that students can learn. So I think that those are dual language, and schools enable kind of more of a capacity to not segregate students who speak Spanish, which is all too often happening, right? All too often, students' languages are not used as a form of literacy and not drawn on as a form of literacy. And so those dual immersion schools are teaching students content in a way that recognizes the literacies that they bring to the classroom. Whereas I think the non-dual immersion schools are less likely to do that. Does that answer your question, Dusty?
Yes, it did. And Belinda and I were actually kind of playing off of each other, in that terminology. But I was just thinking that the immersion school, are they serving the same purpose, as your work is aiming at? I think it would be an important topic, to look into for those of us in K-12.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I will stop there. Again, Anne Marie, thank you so much for a wonderful, awesome presentation. To those of you who are still around, I included information for our next diversity lecture, which will be on April 16th. Jackie Blount will be the speaker. Title is A Great Queer Reckoning in School Leadership 1 Century Ago. And so hopefully you all will attend and help us spread the word. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. Take care.